But when we reflect back for the thousands of years when women revered this as the most sacred time of the month, something in us softens. So we realize that maybe there is something more to this 3 to 5 day moments of our month. Maybe there is something far more sacred that we haven't even begun to witness. When we begin to realize that cultures all over the world saw menstruation as the most sacred thing next to childbirth that a woman could ever experience, it really engages us, and it makes us want to understand this powerful natural phenomena that we all experience every month.
Namaste. You're listening to the Savannah Podcast. Join us on an exploration of Eastern spirituality, yoga philosophy, and conscious living for the new age. This podcast is a production of SavannahSpirit.com, the best place to shop for unique clothing, spiritual handcrafted jewelry, healing gemstones, and fair trade gifts from the Far East. Now, here's your host, Brett Larkin.
Hello, Savannah family. Welcome back to the show. I'm so glad you're here. Today, we are talking to Cassandra Wilder. She is a naturopathic doctor, a yoga instructor, and the creator of the GoddessCeremony, a global sisterhood that teaches women how to live empowered, authentic lives. She's super passionate about women's health and wellness, and today we're talking about how you can reclaim your period as a sacred experience. So Cassandra's going to tell us how we can really use this time of the month to go inward to make space for healing. And she's going to invite us to remember the sacred significance of menstruation, which often gets lost in our modern culture. So get ready to shift your perspective around your period and learn a lot of practical tips. She's going to tell us 4 natural ways we can alleviate common symptoms like PMS and bloating and cramping and fatigue naturally. So I'm super excited to share all of this with you. Before I do, I just want to remind you of how you can support the show by leaving a rating or review here on iTunes, and there's instructions on how to do that in the show notes. And then the other way is to make a purchase on SavannahSpirit.com, and I have something pretty special to offer. I've teamed up with Savannah to create an uplifted box. So this is a special gift box that I put together. It's my favorite items on SavannahSpirit.com in this really beautiful gift package. It has their crystal cleansing smudge set. It has their baby pocket ganache, this beautiful anklet, a beautiful bracelet. It has lavender incense. It has Himalayan bath sea salts, which are my favorite to bathe in the evening. And the best news is that this box that is usually $120 is right now only $59. And if you've never purchased anything at Savannah Spirit, you can use that Take25 coupon code from the podcast, Take25, to get an even better deal on the box. Honestly, this is a really good deal. So go on over to SavannahSpirit.com, just hit the little search icon and start typing Uplifted. As many of you know, that's the name of my teacher training and teaching community, and you'll see this special Uplifted gift box. All right, now without further ado, let's dive into today's show with Cassandra. Cassandra, I'm so glad you're here. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, I'm super excited to talk all things menstruation with you because I hadn't really talked about this a lot. And we had one guest who came on the show a couple months ago, and I will also link up her episode below for anyone who's interested and really wants to deep dive on this topic. And it totally blew my mind. So I'm really excited. And she was an Ayurvedic practitioner. So I'm really excited to get your take on all of this. Maybe you can start out by just telling the listeners a little bit about yourself, like how you got so passionate about women's health, interested in menstruation specifically, and a little bit about your background.
Absolutely. So when I was younger, I had a lot of menstrual related imbalances. I would go months without having a regular menstrual cycle, chronic depression, so many things that were related back to my cycle. And yet I felt that I didn't have the tools that I needed to really address it. So this propelled me to continue my schooling to become a naturopathic doctor. I graduated in 2017 now. And that was where I began to understand how significant menstruation really is and how profound being connected to that experience is. And yet I was surprised that so few of us have ever been taught this information. So that gave me a really good background in terms of the medical side of it, the physiological components of menstruation. And then as I began to revive some traditional women's wisdom, I studied with some really incredible women in Guatemala. I was amazed at how intrinsic menstruation was to their culture and how it had been revered for thousands of years. So the last few years have been this interesting journey of weaving together modern health with traditional women's wisdom and finding this incredible complementary balance of both of them together. And so that's what I do now as a naturopath and also in the women's offerings that I create.
I love it. So you're blending the modern and the mystical. Tell me, this is a silly question, but a naturopathic doctor, what is that? What does that mean? Does that mean you went to med school or you did a certain type of certification program?
Yeah, so a naturopathic doctor is in essence a natural-minded physician. And so it's a little different in every state. Licensure is a little different. But as a traditional naturopathic doctor, I don't prescribe any medications and rather seek to find the root cause of any condition. So if a woman came to me with very irregular cycles, maybe was having a hard time getting pregnant, I'm more so looking at her from that mind, body, spirit perspective as I ask, why is the body responding in this way? And what do these symptoms mean about this health overall?
Okay, beautiful. So tell us a little bit about the time in Guatemala and how is menstruation talked about and handled there differently than it is perhaps in London or, big cities in Europe or America.
Right. So differently. So differently. In Guatemala, they talked a lot about the significance of being connected to your menstrual cycle. And that's where I began to learn about the traditional wisdom surrounding it. They talked about how there were many, many cultures around the world who would gather with the new moon time and sit in circle and menstruate together. And so a lot of you, if you have sisters or have been around a lot of women, you know that when women spend time together, their cycles tend to sync. And so if you can imagine living in a close-knit community or a village, women who spent time together would sync together. And so generally all women would be menstruating at the exact same time every month on the new moon. And these women would gather for 3 to 5 days in what they called a moon lodge or a red tent. And it was there that they would be relieved of all of their duties that they would traditionally be doing in the village. And they would have this space to rest, to physically bleed right into the earth, to share stories, to connect with wisdom. I often think how different would all of our lives be if, at 13 years of age, we're sitting in a sacred space with women in their 30s, their 40s, 50s, 60s. How much wiser would we all be if we had that safe container to learn the art of the feminine? So few of us got that.
I know. I've read that book, The Red Tent. Do you know the one I'm talking about?
Yes.
Oh, I love that book. I read it when I was pregnant. And I agree. It's like right now, I feel like having your period is a very isolating experience almost. But as you're saying in the ancient wisdom, the ancient cultures, it was such a communal experience. And so that, young girls, when this first starts happening, they don't feel alone. They feel initiated into something powerful. Am I understanding that right?
Exactly.
Because I think, well, I know you're working with so many women, so tell me what you're hearing. But I think for many of us growing up, this wasn't something that was talked about. If anything, a lot of women have shame around this parts of our bodies and this function. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Oh my gosh, it's an epidemic. And I think most of us can all resonate with that we didn't grow up in a community that really welcomed menstruation. So few of us had any form of an initiation. And if anything, we likely had a negative experience. And before we judge our moms or our grandmothers, we have to remember that this wound goes back so many generations. It has been decades, if not centuries, of disconnection. And so if anything, I hear women share that when they got their first cycle, they were told, you have the curse now, or you need to repent for this sin, or you're going to have to deal with this thing for the rest of your life. I mean, talk about some really heavy limiting beliefs that have been put on so many women. And that was certainly my experience as well. And so for anyone listening, if you've had these kinds of feelings, or if you felt incredibly repressed in your menstruation, it's so sadly common.
I know. I think repressed is like one end of the spectrum, and the other end of the spectrum is just like annoyance, right? Like I'm not as productive. I don't feel as good. I can't get as much done, something like that. So how do we start to sort of shift out of that mindset? Because as much as I would love to gather with like the other women living around me and, not work for a couple days, like this is not realistic, right? So what practical advice are you giving the amazing women that you're working with?
Yes. So I have 4 tips right now that I can offer to help transform your relationship to your menstrual cycle so that you can begin to see it as an empowering time and maybe even begin to feel some connection to this. So the number one tip that I will share with women, whether it's in a one-on-one setting as a client, or if I'm doing a retreat or a women's circle of some kind, the biggest tool that I can offer is to choose to change your perception of your cycle every month. There's an incredible book by Dr. Bruce Lipton called The Biology of Belief. Highly recommend it to anyone. But he talks about the science of our beliefs, right? So if you go into your menstrual cycle every month and say, this is the worst thing ever, I'm in so much pain, I can't get out of bed, I have to take these pain pills, otherwise I can't function. Those are some pretty massive limiting beliefs. And then are we really surprised that that becomes our reality, that we do have a terrible experience? So by simply shifting your perspective to something more like, I'm open to feeling this, or I am open to changing my perspective about menstruation. I might even try to feel grateful for this experience. Everything shifts.
Okay, Cassandra, I'm going to stop you here for a second because I want to hear the other tips, but I'm sure some listeners may be thinking like, okay, this sounds great. I want to shift my perspective, but what if I have actual really painful symptoms like associated with my cycle, like, intense PMS or cramping or, debilitating pain?
Yes, I'll address that here in just a couple minutes because that is very, very valid. But the mind certainly does play into that as well. If we go into our cycle saying, this is horrible and I will be in so much pain, that does not help the situation, right? So there are some really good suggestions that I have for PMS and cramping and all of that.
Okay, perfect. I just want to make sure. All right, so let's keep going. So a shift in perspective, huge. What's the next big piece of this?
So the next really powerful tip is to listen to your body when you menstruate. And this is so foreign to many of us. So many of us are quick to grab for the Midol, right? Or we're quick to not really want to address what our body is actually feeling. And it's a really powerful moment when we stop, feel into our body and ask ourselves, why are we feeling this? So when you start to feel those deep, achy, cramping feelings deep in your body, what if we chose to honor our natural intuitive desire in that moment? When we menstruate, we have this innate desire to slow down. It's biology. It's the way the female body was created, to slow down and make space for healing. And yet so many of us in this modern world are always in this state of go, stress. We gotta do more, create more. And what if we created a small amount of space in our life to honor our bodies as it was going through these natural shifts? And whether that's taking 5 minutes to sit down at the office or creating an evening where we can take a bath and our kids can go over to the neighbors, whatever, creating space to listen to your body rather than push it away or numb it.
Yes, I love this. I think especially for high achieving women or people who don't like to slow down so much, it can be really helpful to, actually use this time, use this time as structure where you're saying this is going to be my receptive time instead of my go time.
Exactly. And this is so applicable too, even within the yoga world. How many of us have gone to a hot power yoga class on the first day of our cycle and totally regretted it because it's against our innate need? And so this would be a far better time to go to a yin yoga class, or maybe even, this is going to sound crazy, skip a workout or skip going to yoga that day.
Skipping the practice. Yeah. Yep. Maybe it's time to just lie down, do yoga nidra, meditate, one hand on heart, one hand on belly, and slow down. So, okay, cool. What's tip number 3?
Tip number 3 is to look at the way that you menstruate. When most of us began our menstrual years, we were given two options. We were given a pad and we were given a tampon, and we were told that that's it. The sad thing is that the sanitary products industry has a very, very sinister side, and these products are not safe for most women to use. There's a huge amount of research coming out on all of this, but from dioxins to genetically modified cotton to xenoestrogens, meaning false estrogens, we're seeing these products cause a lot of imbalances for women. So if we can begin to make better choices in our sanitary products, we can support our reproductive system as a whole. And there are so many more options out there than just regular pads and tampons. Because these products are often laced with these chemicals, our bodies actually reject them. And so the cramping becomes more dramatic because our body is literally trying to push, say, for example, a tampon out of the body. It's our body trying to reject it. And so when we make the switch to things like a menstrual cup or even reusable organic pads and tampons or period panties, there's so many options out there now. We're no longer feeding our body these chemicals, and therefore our symptoms drastically lower. In the hundreds of women that I've worked with personally, this isn't a true study, but it's what I've seen through all of these women that I've worked with. Just when women make a switch to a menstrual cup, they see a 75% reduction in menstrual cramps. And that's huge. That's huge. Just for making that one switch, because their body is no longer being filled with these chemicals that cause so many imbalances.
Wow, that's really surprising and shocking to me. And yeah, in the same time, it's like the pads and the tampons, you have to keep buying more of them, right? Like forever and ever and ever. And so many of these other options, whether it's the period panties, I love those, or Diva Cup, I also really love, or Menstrual Cup, whatever brand you're using. It's a much more long-term solution. So it's also going to save you money if you're listening, which is pretty cool as well. Yeah. All right. What's the fourth tip?
The fourth tip is to remember the significance of menstruation. I think in our modern world, it's easy to think that this is an annoyance, that this is something we got to deal with. It's something that feels so limiting to us. But when we reflect back for the thousands of years when women revered this as the most sacred time of the month, something in us softens. So we realize that maybe there is something more to this 3 to 5 day moments of our month. Maybe there is something far more sacred that we haven't even begun to witness. When we begin to realize that cultures all over the world saw menstruation as the most sacred thing next to childbirth that a woman could ever experience, it really engages us, and it makes us want to understand this powerful natural phenomena that we all experience every month.
Beautiful. So tell me now what you tell your clients, people you work with, to do about some of the symptoms that are uncomfortable for women: cramping, bloating, feeling depressed or lethargic, because I know so many people listening might experience those symptoms. What are some natural ways that they can approach this instead of reaching for drugs, like you mentioned?
Well, so for example, with menstrual cramps, there's a few things that can be really helpful. Number one would be to look at your sanitary products again. That's really, really important, and you'll likely notice a huge difference. But number two, there are some herbs like red raspberry leaf tea that are really simple additions to your daily routine, especially when you're menstruating. To just drink 1 cup of that is going to help hugely. This herb has been used for thousands of years by midwives to help calm the uterus, to help alleviate contractions. And it also helps to replenish the body with iron. And when we're low in iron, we tend to have more exaggerated symptoms, especially in terms of feeling really tired and the menstrual cramps themselves. So that's a huge tip, to just add that tea to your regular routine. Makes a huge difference. With things like lethargy, it's also important to remember that what our body is doing when we menstruate is a really huge feat. The body is moving through massive changes in hormones, its structure. It's really quite incredible. And so it might be worth just bringing awareness to that maybe your body is tired for a reason. And maybe we don't need to caffeinate ourselves. Maybe we don't need to hype ourselves up. And rather, perhaps it would be far more powerful to listen to our body's need to rest.
In terms of yoga poses and yoga practice, we touched on this a little bit, but I know, I'm sure you get asked this all the time, but I, like in my teacher trainings and things, people are always like, what's the deal with yoga on your period? You can't do inversions and you can't do breath of fire and you can't, there's so many kind of can'ts and restrictions. Can you speak to that a little bit? What do you advise your clients to do in their practice during this time of the month?
Yeah, that's a great question. I do get that a lot.
And are there any like do's and don'ts, that you really feel are worth sharing?
I think the biggest tip I can offer here is to honor your body above all else. And so, if you're going to Ashtanga yoga and they're telling you you can't even come if you're on your cycle, if that resonates with you, then honor that. But if that doesn't resonate, then find another practice that does work for you. All of our bodies are so incredibly different. I think the one big tip that I will offer is that inversions typically are not recommended when menstruating because we are changing the flow of the body. The body is trying to flush all of this out. And so to go upside down, especially if we have something like a menstrual cup in, we're really changing the whole dynamic of our menstruation experience. So I personally don't practice inversions while I'm menstruating, but as far as everything else, you need to let your body be your own greatest teacher.
And then do you want to speak to any more before we close out? And I know we're having you back, so we're going to talk a little bit about the lunar phases and go deeper. Is there anything else you want to share about how we can really view this as a sacred time? I think the other guest I had on who was speaking about this she was saying it's sort of a time where we're co-creating with the divine, and it's a time where the second chakra is, I think, in like a heightened awareness state. So you're going to get your best ideas when you're menstruating, potentially, if you take that time to slow down. It's this co-creation with the divine. Do you agree with that or have anything you'd like to add?
I absolutely agree with her. I think those are very wise words. And I think another powerful thing I could add to that is that the new moon time, like we'll talk about in the next podcast, is the time of letting go and releasing. And that's why most cultures would menstruate with the new moon, because the body is physically releasing. As you menstruate every month, you have the opportunity to let go and release in more ways than just the physical way, also in an emotional and mental level. So when you menstruate, see it as an opportunity to get quiet, to honor your natural need to be more introverted, to honor your natural lowered energy levels, and to look within. You might find that this becomes a really powerful practice to cultivate every single month, to ask yourself, what is no longer serving me? What can I let go of? And how can I honor myself a little bit more during this quiet rest period?
Beautiful. So I'm sure so many people are wondering, how does the menstruation sync up with the new moon? Is there something wrong with me if it's not synced up? So we're going to answer all of that the next episode. So make sure you stay tuned. And Cassandra's going to come back and dive deep with us into all of that. For now, I just want to say, Cassandra, thank you so much for coming on and speaking to us about this. And I think these tips are really practical and actionable for folks. Just quickly, I'm going to have your links to your website and everything below, but just tell listeners your website and how they can find you.
Yes, thank you, Brett. So if you want to connect with me, my website is GoddessCeremony.com. Whether you need some one-on-one support from a naturopath to help rebalance your menstrual cycle, or if you want to join us for a sacred goddess retreat and have this red tent-like experience, it'd be an honor to see you and work with you.
Okay, perfect. So Savannah listeners, let me know if you enjoyed this episode. You can always connect with me on Instagram at Larkin Yoga TV, and don't forget to also connect with Savannah Spirit while you're there at Savannah Spirit. And like I mentioned, we are going to go deeper with all of this in the next episode. So I'm super excited and I can't wait to connect with you then. From my heart to yours, namaste.
You've been listening to the Savannah Podcast. To find out more about Savannah, go to savannahspirit.com or follow Savannah on Facebook at facebook.com/Savannah Spirit. For daily inspiration, check out our blog at savannaeast.com. Be sure to join us next week for a new episode, and thank you for listening to the Savannah Podcast.